Hello there my lovely jewelry makers, I'm Christina at CSLdesigns, and in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to make this Braided Princess wirework bracelet. Now these have loads of sparkle and colour, and they're also available for sale in my shop along with other jewelry kits and tutorials, so I'm going to leave a link to that in the description box down below. Otherwise, if you want to learn how you can make them for yourself, then keep watching. So these are the materials that we'll need. Now the wire I'm using is a regular round silver coated copper wire, and the gauge is a 0.6mm. And then we need two different kinds of beads. Now the first ones here are these 6mm Rose Montees, and then I've also got 4mm bicones. Now you could use something else in place of the bicones to play around with some different shapes, but I do feel the bicones fit perfectly and they add a lovely sparkle. To finish off the ends of the bracelet, I'm going to use these ribbon ends that have loops in them where we can attach our findings. And then ones I'm going to be using is a lobster claw clasp, an extender chain, and a few jump rings to put it together. You can of course use whatever kind of clasp you prefer. And alongside the ribbon ends, I'm also going to use this E6000 glue to help make it nice and strong. As for the tools, first of all we need something to cut our wire, so I've got my flush cutters here. I've got chain nose and tweezer nose pliers to help manipulate the wire and for the jump rings. And then I'm also going to be using this spring clamp. Now this is to hold the wires in place while we're braiding. And you can check out the description box below the video for the material list and useful links. Otherwise, let's get it all ready and let's get started. Then we need to cut some lengths of the wire, and I have 8 lengths here of about 30 centimeters each. And what I've done is I've made sure all the ends are even and then put them through my spring clamp like that, so it holds onto the wires nicely and we can work with it more easily. And I've just left a few centimeters of the wires coming through there. And then it's time to start braiding. So I'm just going to first of all separate my wires out a bit, straight down the middle first of all, and just pull the two groups out to either side. And then after that I'm going to pull the very outer wire away from the other 3, so the inner 3 from the group, so I end up having 2 groups of 3 on the inside there in the middle, and then 1 single wire on either side. And then what we're going to be doing is a basic 4-strand braid. So I'm going to start with the inner 2 groups of wires here. So I'm making sure as well that all the wires in the groups are laying flat next to each other, but I'm going to be using them as if they were one length. So I'm going to take the right one and cross it over the left one while making sure all the wires are flat next to each other, and then just pull them over a bit like that. So they're basically swap places now. And then I'm going to take the very outer wire, I'm just going to start on the right side, it doesn't matter where you start, and then bring that underneath the inner group here and into the middle, and the left one here then goes over the group and comes into the middle. So we've now ended up with the 2 individual wires in the middle instead of the groups. So basically everything is swapped places now, and this is where I'm going to be adding my first bead. So I'm only going to be adding my beads to the single wires because obviously we can't really fit them onto all 3 wires in the groups. So just take one wire at a time, and then first of all I take my Rose Montee and then put one length through in one direction so it sits like that. And on the back you can see we have these little channels, and this length is going through one of the channels. Bring it down a little bit, and then I'm going to take the other length and bring that through the other channel. So you can see they kind of cross over each other there and come out on opposite sides, and then just pull them through and bring the bead further down, and just do it gently so we don't strip the wire or anything, but then push the bead all the way down to sit right in between the 2 groups of wires. And then we can just straighten everything back out because the wire can get a little bit misshapen from the warmth of our fingers and obviously the movements that we're making. But then you just make sure this Rose Montee is sitting as far as it'll go up in that corner between the 2 groups of wires. Now we then need to continue the braid, so I'm going to bring the groups back in the middle, and I'm just doing one at a time. So again, make sure you keep them nice and flat next to each other, all the wires in that same group. And I'm just going to check on the right side here, this group here came over the top of the wire previously, so that means now I need to bring it under and then into the middle, making sure, like I said, the wires are flat next to each other, and then just smooth them out so they're kind of just hugging this side of the Rose Montee. And on the other side we're going to do the opposite because this group went underneath the other wire previously, so now it needs to come over and into the middle. And again, just make sure they stay flat next to each other, and then create that curve around the side of the Rose Montee. And then here in the middle, what I'm going to make sure to do as well is that these 2 groups come opposite to what they were doing before. So that means I just need to make sure they cross the opposite way than they just were. So we end up with them constantly going over and under and over and under, because that's how we create a braid. And then you can see, pulling everything a bit tighter, that Rose Montee just sits right in between basically those groups of wires and just hugs it nicely. So now we again have the groups of wires in the middle and the single wires on the outside. So from here, we need to now move the single wires in the middle again. So before I move the single wires for the next movement here, I'm going to take a bead, and in this case I'm then taking a bicone and letting it drop all the way down, so that when I move this wire, in this case it went over the top of the group previously, so now I'm going to bring it underneath, and I'm making sure that the bicone there is going to stay in that little corner between the groups of wires, and then bring it into the middle so it kind of gets trapped in place on that outer edge. And on the other side I'm going to do the same. So to the single wire, add a bead, let it drop down, so it's going to sit in that corner. Now this one we need to do opposite, so this needs to come over because it went underneath previously, and then into the middle. So we've added one Rose Montee and then one bicone on either side. Now the next step here is the Rose Montee again. We need to add another one. So I'm going to grab a Rose Montee and then put one length of wire through in one direction and then bring it down a little bit, so I can then take the other length and come through the other hole, so we get the wires crossing basically inside of the bead, and then just let it come all the way down to sit in that corner between the two groups. Smooth everything out and make sure it's nice and tight. And then the next movement are going to be the groups. So previously this right group here went over, so that means now I'm going to bring it under, and again like before, make sure the group stays nice and flat, all the wires within it, and into the middle. And on the other side, it went under last, so now it needs to come over. And I like to just place my fingers on either side of the group here to help the wires stay nice and flat next to each other. And smooth everything out. And then in the middle, just make sure we cross the groups over in the opposite direction. So we constantly have that over, under pattern that we have in a braid. Now again, the two groups are hugging that Rose Montee nicely. And next we need to add our bicones. So before I move the single wires, add a bead to the outer single wire, and it went over last, so now it needs to come under. Make sure the bead stays in that outer corner and gets trapped in place. Smooth out your wires. Repeat on the other side, so let the bead drop all the way down. And then this one came under last, so now it needs to go over and into the middle. And then we can also just cross the wires in the middle. Now when it's a single wires, we don't really have to do that because we're adding the Rose Montee, so they're going to be crossing inside of the bead, but just to get in the habit, because we do need to do it correctly when we do the groups. But that is basically how you make this braid. So you're adding in the Rose Montees in the middle, that then gets kind of hugged by the groups of wires, and we're only adding beads to the single wires all the way along. So just keep going like this until you have the length that you need. I now have the full length here, bearing in mind the clasp is also going to add some length to the bracelet. So what I'm going to do now is finish off the ends. Both ends are the same, so I'm just going to show you on the one. So here I've ended up adding the Rose Montee last, and I have my two groups of wires in the middle, and I've had them cross. What I'm then going to do is bring them back out so they come straight out from the end here and next to each other like that. And then I'm going to bring the single wires also up just next to them on the outside here. And then of course we need to add our ribbon end, but right now these wires are too long, so I need to cut them down. So I'm just going to cut the inner groups, not the outer ones just yet. So just one at a time. And what I do like to do as well to help guide with where you need to cut is place the ribbon end on top, and you can see where it ends, and I know where I'm going to have to cut so they fit inside of the ribbon end nicely. Obviously, rather make them too long than too short, because you can always cut off more, but you can't add any more. So get rid of that. Cut the other group as well to the same length. Get rid of those. And then I'm going to just take my tweezer nose, and with one wire at a time, I'm just going to place my pliers on that wire where the other one's end that we just cut off, and then bend it to the opposite side so they come straight across the end of the other wires there. And then the same with the other one, so just basically put a 90-degree bend into it, so we end up with something a bit like that. We then need to cut these down, so I'm going to cut them in the middle, just one at a time, and then the other side. So basically the two ends end up more or less meeting up like that. And now to fasten the ribbon end in place, we need to get a glue out. So I get my glue, and I'm just going to use a toothpick to apply it with. So get a little bit onto the toothpick, and then you just want to put this inside of the ribbon end. Just make sure you cover the inside walls. You don't have to fill it up completely because it's going to get squished down and the glue's just going to come spilling out, but just add enough to cover the inside walls. And then I also like to take what's left on my toothpick and just put it on the end of the bracelet itself. So make sure to get in between the wires there in the nooks and crannies, because that way when we put the two pieces together and they dry, they will adhere nicely and be nice and strong. So something like that. Then put the ribbon end over the wires, grab your chain nose pliers or flat nose, and then I like to just put a finger on either side of it while I start to squeeze this down. And I like to do it a bit at a time, so not go in and just do one big push, because it can slip a little bit while we're doing that. So I get it almost all the way tight, double check that it's still in the middle, and then I just do my final squeeze, make sure that's going to be nice and tight so it really grabs around the wires. And I also like to go in from the sides just to close them up. And then of course we just need to leave that to dry, and we then have our loops there where we can attach our findings. So now I've finished off both ends and I've attached my clasp and extender chain as well. All that's left to do is shape it. So what I'm going to do is go into one place and start putting a curve into it. Obviously you want to make sure the front of the bracelet is facing outward. So just go in and start putting a curve, going back and forth from side to side. You don't want to go in and just put a big bend into it, that's going to put it out of shape, but gradually put that curve into it. You can also shape it around something that has a size and shape that you want it to have, like a bracelet mandrel. But the aim is to get the ends close to each other so we can use a clasp. So we end up with something a bit like this. And then your bracelet is finished and ready to wear. So that is how you make this cute braided princess wirework bracelet with loads of sparkle and colour. So it's really just a basic braiding technique, it's just all about the beads that we add in. Now I've got loads of braided wirework tutorials on my channel, I have a playlist full of them, so if you want to have a look at that, there's going to be a link in the description box down below. Otherwise, I do hope you enjoyed this one, thank you so much for watching it, and I'll see you in the next one.